1.1B, which is that we will have a comprehensive long-range finance and facilities plan that address continued growth and maintaining high-quality facilities and making sure that our programming needs are met. And so there are various sources of revenue, again, that goes directly into our capital projects fund. Capital projects fund is a different fund if you don't know anything about government accounting. We talk about our operating funds, which is our general fund and our teachers fund. And capital projects is separate, which is a requirement through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And there's a different sources of revenue that go into that fund to be able to fund these capital projects. So of course we have to know how much money we have before we can know how much money we can spend. And so the pot of money mainly that we are talking about for the April approval for capital projects is mainly our local funding. That is our reoccurring funding that we have each year. And the main 0.1 of our property tax levy goes into the capital projects fund. And so that property tax revenue is the largest by far source of recurring revenue that goes into the capital projects fund. And that's about $3 million a year. There's some other stuff in local, like some investment interest and some of those other smaller bits of money, but by far the largest piece of that is our property tax. Then the other one is, which is much larger, is the bond funding. Again, any bond funding is debt that has to be authorized by the voters. So that is a much more comprehensive process. And so that all of that is done through our long-range facilities planning committee when we're determining the timing and issuance of bond funding. So the last bond funding that we had was authorized, again, we just talked about this because we just did our issuance at the last board meeting. So we had the $80 million that was determined prior to that. We went and campaigned to the voters. That $80 million was passed. Then there was two $40 million issuances, and mainly that was to cover those three large projects: the building of the new Southwest Elementary School, the Career Center renovation and addition, and the addition onto Battle Elementary School. So there will be additional bond funding, but there's not any additional right now. Three, we did have the last couple years, which will be a little bit of carryover into the next year. We did have that ESSER stimulus funding. This is the last year for that, but we do have until September 30th until that money is completed. And then we have transfers from the operating fund. And so you will see those every year as well, because we're required by law for things like the lease and principal and interest payment on this building, on the Aslan building, because it's not general obligation bonds. It was a certificates of participation, which is a different kind of debt, but that is required to be paid by operating fund. And so you'll see a transfer from the operating fund every year into the capital projects fund to be able to make that payment. Same thing for the nature school. It was a different source of lease purchase payment on that. So you'll see that transfer made. And also any individual school or departments are allowed to transfer if they have money in their operating funds, if they have to purchase any piece of equipment that is, or anything else that's over $1,000 that qualifies to be purchased out of the capital projects fund, they're permitted to do a transfer. You will see most likely a large transfer from technology services. Previously, all of our devices were under $1,000. Most devices now are over $1,000. So anything that could have been purchased out of the operating fund previously is now going to be purchased out of the capital projects fund. So this, for the 24-25 school year, most of those teacher and student devices are now over $1,000, and so that's going to be coming out of the capital projects fund. So local funding, again, the main source of that funding is from our local property tax revenue. There's, again, about $3 to $4 million that's recurring revenue annually that we can allocate for different projects. So the first part of that process, as we start our budgeting process back in January, a spreadsheet is sent out to all buildings, departments, district administrators annually requesting that capital needs be submitted. Again, I am not an expert on whether a roof needs repaired or tuck pointing needs to be done or anything like that. So we have to be able to rely on our experts and the people that are in the buildings climbing on roofs and inspecting our systems and our HVAC personnel and those people that give recommendations. If someone says a boiler needs fixed, I'm probably going to trust that a boiler needs fixed. So if they don't have air conditioning in a building, then someone's got to tell me that.
Are those the kinds of projects that, if I can ask, that come in on those spreadsheets, or are those more things like desks or curtains or furniture things?
So both. And so if a building has a need, then that is outside of their scope besides just like I want some new cafeteria tables or a new laminating machine, that they can get pricing on those things through our purchasing department, or that they have to, if it's a building type construction project need, then they have to consult with our facilities team, who either, if they cannot provide that information themselves, obviously would consult with our architect to be able to determine like scope and costs and those things before they would submit that to us.
I will say over the last several years, our administrators have gotten a lot better when they are requesting something that is somewhat of a maintenance or kind of a larger repair. They are going first to facilities to get like a realistic cost. I know when I was in a building, sometimes we were just still kind of winging it. Yeah, we think it was this, but we have been able to work with administrators, and they are much more diligent now. So if they've got something that's rolling around, rather than just putting, refloor this XYZ number, they've actually already been in contact with facilities. This is a legitimate number, and then we can kind of look. And we also do kind of the double check when we start talking with facilities about individual projects, and we have something that originated from the building or appears to originate from building. Ron, have you actually looked at this project? Yeah, we've been over, we've measured, we think this. So that's, I will say, in the last 5 years, we've made some progress in that area versus just sometimes some wild estimations, if you will. So it is much more focused, so we can make a bit better decision.
And we have our big administrative meetings where we have all the building and department people here. Just like when I talk about zero-based budgets, this capital thing is something that we talk about. So all the administrators know. It's like, if you have something that you think needs to be done, I tell them that. Make sure you are, vetting that through facilities. Make sure you have a good scope and estimate. Don't just send some wild number that we don't really know, like if that's, even close to being accurate or not. So they know that and facilities knows they're in the same room when we have this discussion, that a lot of building administrators are going to be reaching out if they have questions about stuff. But also we have a work order system. And so the last few years, we really have strived to them. If you have something, if you think something needs to be done to your building, typically it doesn't just appear in January when I tell you to fill out the spreadsheet. It's something that you already knew about before that. So if there is something that needs to be done, like fill out the work order so that the facilities already has that in the system, because that's how they track projects as well. They use that as a mechanism to help them determine. So if there is something in the work order system, they already know about. But I also tell the buildings as well, it doesn't hurt for you to include it on your spreadsheet as well. Facilities might include it as one of their recommendations, but if it's coming from multiple parties, that gives it some more merit anyway. So if you feel like you need to put it on your spreadsheet, by all means do so, and make sure that everyone's on the same page.
So same thing, Heather, with athletics. We have an athletic spreadsheet, and then schools.
Correct.
Sometimes those are doubled up.
Yes, so it's many times athletics is asking for the same things that schools are requesting as well.
If something is requested 1 year by a building, does it stay on the list until it's addressed, or do they have to?
They
Put it
have
on
to
their-
submit it every year. Oh, sorry.
No,
A lot of times they copy, like if something's not, they just will copy their list from the previous year and send it back and then add to whatever else needs to be on there.
okay, but if they've submitted a work order, that stays in the system
Correct.
until it's
Correct.
completed.
Yes.
Okay,
That may be in that system as not yet, there's not a budget yet established for that, but yes, then there is that record of that ongoing.
Yeah, there's some sort of field in that system that says waiting funding or something like that, that they are able to go back to those.
There are a few of those.
so then at the end of this process, I give them a deadline and we accumulate all the spreadsheets that are coming in. And then I go through and put them all in a master spreadsheet and I divide them up by, and there's tabs. So all the schools, all the elementaries on one tab, secondaries on one tab, all the department requests are on one tab, operational stuff's on one tab. And then I send it out to all of cabinet, and each cabinet person who is responsible for that specific building or department then is responsible for going through the list and getting in their mind some sort of prioritization. So then when we come together and meet as a team, then just like we do kind of for the for any other budget additions, then we meet as a team and go through to whittle. Usually, again, even once we do that first round, still the funding is not enough to like cover all the projects. So then we have to go through a second round until we get it within an amount that we have funding to cover.
How do you prioritize the projects?
And so,
Like, just loosely.
yes, there. I have a slide in a couple.
Oh,
Can I
yeah.
go over the bond stuff and then I'll go back to that
Yes.
question? Sorry. So that's local funding. The other thing is the bond funding that I just wanted to touch on briefly because, again, that funding must be authorized by the voters. Again, those projects are determined well in advance if there's going to be a new building or a building addition project where we're adding capacity or those type things because that funding is available and it has to be done through the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, and there's a campaign that have to go to the voters. So as we're creating our next 10-year plan, again, the funding for those projects, once the long range facilities, the goal of that committee is to recommend projects that need to be done. And so then once we have the project list, then I would meet with our financial advisor and try to determine the funding that we need to be able to cover the projects that we need to have done. And so then the next step would be, once we do that, then again, Finance Committee would approve the funding, Long Range Facilities would approve the projects. And so the timing and approval of those different bond issuances are then coordinated into the Long Range Facilities Plan, which is also part of our master budget each year. And then again, those projects are communicated when we go to the voters during the bond campaign. So there's some of the language when we do those bond authorizations has some generic things like other critical facility needs. So that allows us flexibility if there is a little bit of money outside of what we need to cover the main projects, that we can use that funding to do some other projects like roofs and tuck pointing and those other kind of fun things. So that money can be used for those things if there's some other stuff that is left over. And so the need prioritization then that you were talking about, there's some, and again, I'm a financial person, I'm not an expert on like buildings. So what we always talk about is the envelope of the building, like safety needs, those type of things are gonna be priority one. So we don't want stuff coming into the building. It'll be no good to redo a flooring project if we have water that's coming into the building because the roof is bad. So we have to prioritize the outside, the envelope of the building, roofs, tuck pointing, and those type things, fire, life safety things. Those are priority one. Then we move inside. The next tier is kind of the systems, the plumbing, the HVAC, the mechanical, all those type things that are inside the building. And then the interior, cosmetic upgrades, flooring projects, those are the next three. And then, but they're kind of like, number 4 is kind of fluid because it all really depends on funding. So if there's a piece of equipment somebody needs for $5,000, it may not be a life safety issue, but we're going to be able to fund a $5,000 piece of equipment before we can do a $5 million project. And so there's some fluidity there with what, after we get the large projects on the list, what other things coming from buildings and departments can we fit in within the money that we have available as well. Does that make sense? Suzette, does that answer your question?
I have a question for Randy.
Reminder to turn on your mic when we're talking. Production is here.
Even Even though we're sitting close by each other, I'm going to use that mic for people who listen later. So, Randy, when this prioritization happens, what do principals do? Do they know where they stand on the list? Do they know the proper process? Like, we've gotten quite a few letters about this is wrong at a school. And so I'm like, does the principal know? Is there a process? Have they turned in anything? So those are the questions.
With the zero-based they switched.
I know.
Okay, so what we do, and so overall the process, obviously, once the board approves that list, those are the approved. So that's some acknowledgement of what's approved and not. What we'll also do from time to time, that list kind of stays out there. There are times that sometimes additional funds or money make themselves available. Sometimes as we look into some of those projects, there are times that, okay, maybe we found a little bit more in an area. It doesn't make sense to do that. So we have some that are ready to move up the hierarchy. So that's part of it. Like I said, in the last 5 years, it's been pretty good, better with the communication with administration and their projects. When I was at the Career Center, every year I wanted new flooring, that black, ugly tile that was cracking. Now, 13 years later, in a remodel, it's happening, but I never got that then. And part of the reason was, and I didn't necessarily understand it as a building administrator, and I should have asked more questions. But day one in this job, Charlie A. Strike took me on a tour of our buildings, and I rolled into Blue Ridge. Never been there before. I looked at the tile, and I counted at least 20 different colors in no particular artistic order. It was a hodgepodge, and it kind of came on to me. So what we've tried to do over time, and as we talk with building administrators, is that actually we try to set some realistic expectations. There are far more projects than there is money. So we have to really look at those projects that are going to advance what we have and hopefully meet a larger need. So there's a lot of them that they're legitimate projects, but there's just not always that money available in that funding process to do it. So nobody likes to be told no, but I mean, in this part of it, that's part of it. Now, there's some nice surprises sometimes. So we had a really good meeting with our 3 big projects that are going on bond funding. If that continues to work that way, they just received all the bids on the Southwest. It's likely that maybe we're going to have some savings there from what they estimated, and that might end up being some money that can be put towards some of these projects. So, I mean, these lists don't go away. They're there, and it makes it possible then, if there is a change in a situation, to be able to put something in there.
Thanks, Randy.
Karen, also to kind of piggyback on that, just like we do with any kind of staffing requests or additions, like usually, like each one of us as a cabinet member, if we have a department that's requesting something, like we leave the meeting, like we then know, like we either have to if we're following up with our buildings or our departments or whoever, someone's responsible for following up with them to say this, again, pending board approval, we're recommending that this move forward or that move forward to go on to the capital projects list for the next year.
Thank you.
And just to add on to that too, the principal, we expect them to be the operations facilities leader of their building, obviously. And if there's a special interest that has a reason for advocating for something, which is appropriate, the principal has to look at it as a whole. So different people have different priorities in relation to building needs.
And we, as a district, have to look at everything. So someone like Randy was saying when he was at the Career Center, or someone thinks whatever is happening in their building is the most highest, most important thing in the as a district. But then we have to kind of look at all that globally too, and kind of bring that together. And what we're recommending. And not everyone can have everything. And I think most buildings are realistic. Battle knows they are not getting a wrestling room until we have a bond project. I mean, because that is like, or a new swimming. Hickman's not getting any kind of new swimming pool. I mean, anything that costs, 10, 20, $50 million, that's not going to happen with our $3 million in property tax money each year. So I mean, most of them, even though, yes, they know that, I mean, I think still people like to, have their things that is very, important to them that they still try to advocate for. And so I know probably still, make recommendations to the board or whoever. But yes, I think in their mind, they have been told, like, if it's something that costs $10 million, we can't cover that with $3 million in recurring revenue.
I think some of them sometimes too even indicate they know it's coming from bonds.
Yes.
So that's good. And I'm glad that they put it on every year because it just keeps track of their desire. I have a couple of questions. So when the buildings were constructing their request for this year, had they received their section of the facilities audit to help them form their request? So that because I'm sure there's stuff in there that they may not know about.
Probably not in any great detail. There are a few that have asked for it, and we've definitely given it to them. There again, a lot of times they're working with what they're perceiving as emergent needs, and so they're dealing with something that's very obvious. A lot of what's in facility audits, when you start talking about those systems, you talk about building envelopes, safety, those sort of things. Those are not going to be just
They're not going to slap you in the face.
right. And quite honestly, I mean, those are more things that facilities and our specialized maintenance, those people they're dealing with that every day, and they're in and out of those buildings. So the awareness level there, and for those type of projects, usually are coming through the facilities.
So,
Because you could have, we can have an HVAC system that appears today to be doing pretty good. And when we kick up the temperature here in a few weeks, it may be suffering. But our specialized maintenance already probably knows, hey, we
We gotta watch
we've
that.
we've got a system there that we're gonna have to coach along. We're gonna have to watch because we know that. But probably anybody in that building might not have much knowledge of that. So a lot of those bigger pieces and a lot of what is really in the depth of this is going to be coming from the facilities eye, because those are the experts and those are the folks that are seeing that stuff on a daily basis as they're coming in.
And can evaluate globally what in one building
Right.
compared to another building might be emergent.
and I have two more questions. On your list of prioritizations, which makes sense, but my question is, where does things related to ADA fall? Does that fall under envelope of the building or building systems, or does that just kind of depend on what that ADA need is?
Both, yes.
Okay.
And so like our security stuff and the ADA, like a lot of that has been incorporated, in our last several bond issues, we have security and ADA language and those to be able to make sure that we're incorporating some of those needs within the bond funding that we have available as well. If there is a specific student that has an ADA need that's going to a specific school,
Right.
of course, like we try to incorporate that. That's going to be a high need. We did that just last year, I believe, at Mill Creek or
Yes.
at one of the schools. I know we had to make some
Modifications.
changes to be able to meet those needs.
Then my second question, if I understood correctly, what you said was they submit a spreadsheet, you put it all in one thing, you meet with the cabinet members that are kind of in charge of those different areas review it, and then you guys all meet and kind of prioritize the projects. Then you bring that to long-range planning for approval. Can we get what all the requests are? Or are you just bringing us, the 15 requests? Is long-range planning having any meaningful conversation on what they're approving? Or are they just looking at what has been recommended, I guess, is my question, if that makes any sense?
I mean, yeah, if you want all 50 different spreadsheets that I received.
Oh, I love spreadsheets.
I think the more.
That was the wrong thing. Yeah.
It feels more appropriate for the board to know how are things prioritized more than like, we want all the 50 spreadsheets because we're going to make our own determination about what we would
Oh, yeah, I don't
prioritize.
think
Like, I don't
it's
think that's
about
what you're
that.
saying.
No, no, no,
So
no, no.
But I don't know if there's, how much discussion there is in the Facilities and Long Range Committee about those lists, or if they've already been kind of pre-approved before they come to the committee. That's a separate question. Yes. Feels like.
So again, like when we're talking about long range, they have a lot of discussion about choosing large projects, not necessarily like things like the chiller's broken and needs to be repaired or something like that. So there's a lot of discussion that happens over my tenure that has happened in long range planning committees about bond projects and how we prioritize those and what funding is available, but not necessarily on the day-to-day project about whether the kitchen dock needs to be replaced because it's a safety hazard at West Middle School.
I think their questions are much like your questions. What is kind of this prioritization, kind of what's overall, how did you come to this list that you've given us? And then, I think one question that comes up quite a bit, and particularly in that group, is are you grouping projects together to make good working projects to eliminate disruption in the future with, and that's something that we do, particularly on the facility side and these projects we're looking at. We're saying, okay, if we're doing this here, what else makes sense to add into that project while it's tore up and we have maybe this summer window? What else could be fit in? So we're not having to go back in a year or two and do another small project.
I think
So,
that's important too, and even
yeah.
they might be two different projects. For example, like we talked, I think there were some questions about kitchen renovations. Lena says, I have X, Y, and Z kitchens that are on my list that need to be repaired. Well, if we're already closing the school because we're doing some other project, then it makes sense to move that project forward so that we're not closing a school for summer school 3 years in a row, and that we can do it while we're already in there making changes to buildings.
That makes
I
sense.
have a really quick follow-up. If I want to kind of reiterate what you said so I can wrap it around my brain. So in long-range planning, we normally discuss kind of bigger bond projects like building a school, putting on an addition. There's not a lot of discussion because a capital improvement project could be $40,000 for wrestling mats, right? That's not a discussion that we're generally having. So then my question is, why are we approving it and recommending it to the board, and why isn't the cabinet just bringing it and recommending it to the board? I mean, why is that?
I think that's been a process just to give more transparency, to give a different group, while they may not be digging deep, there is that ability to look and ask those questions. So when these committees were first, in the inception of them, that transparency was very important. And how are you going to use this money? So I think over time, what has happened with having that process and more often coming and talking about these things, a little bit of the mystery has been taken out. So that's part of that process too. So we're able to talk to the members of that committee. They become informed, kind of know about the priority, just that process. So it's just kind of, I think, to some extent, broadening that base, that knowledge base, and a larger group that has a little deeper understanding, and another opportunity for public to hear how that is going.
And I do think it's important to have that extra layer of discussion too, even in finance committees. Sometimes, like, I'll do a presentation to the board similar to what I do for the finance committee, but there's a larger, broader discussion. Usually that's happening at finance committee. That's a long, so like, I appreciate any, like, taking the list to long range or the finance, like, to dig deeper if there's questions about specific things, or to have a larger scale discussion before then it's kind of narrowed, and then that recommendation. That's usually why it's recommending that it's coming out of committee, because then you have certain board members that also sit on those committees that can, advocate or not advocate for specific things when it's going in front of the whole board.
And I want to add, I want to chime in here. It's important that, number one, when we bring things to committee, that we bring in things in an accurate and a well-vetted form. So a lot of times, the employees, Randy, his team will have more intimate knowledge about what it is they're bringing and the prioritization of it. So that way, when we bring it to you, it's not something that's basically a low priority item. This is something that we're saying, look, we really need to look at. We need to have our committees weigh in on before we bring it up to the board. So again, it's just a process that allows us to have a greater sense of fidelity in what we bring and the process that we have.
Another thing real quick, I just want to, before I forget, because like, I'll just say something else and I'll forget off top. But if sometimes there's a change in use of a building, like our old Cedar Ridge, like was it a school, or the field building, like with the scholar clinic and those type things. So sometimes when there's a change in use of a building, that will like necessitate a need for a change or a certain work to be done in that building as well. That might, even though it might not be like super like a life safety issue, it might be able to be something that we can incorporate to be able to make sure that it's meeting the needs of the stakeholders that are using that building as well.
Blake has a comment.
Yeah, I'm going to email my questions and I'll send them to you and CC the rest of the board. But my only comment, just because of what we're talking about, my goal as chair of long range right now, because to utilize these kind of meetings that we've added into it, is really for us to begin having kind of a dialogue of just kind of how does that committee support this work, especially with the facility audits and things of that nature. Like us just talking about like where does the committee fit in supporting staff in doing that work, or maybe not do, like, what I mean by supporting is like, as y'all are doing all this assessment, like where could the committee fit in and where could the committee add in that support? And so that is something that I'm wanting to kind of get the ball rolling in that conversation, to also add into sort of like the long term of where our committee structures exist.
Okay.
And to piggyback off that too, I do think it is a goal of the long range, because we've been so focused on growth, and Randy said this out of his presentation last month, that they do need to dig into like some of this deferred maintenance stuff and really decide what is the prioritization, as if we do like some sort of outside evaluation with an outside architect or consultant to recommend how we like package those projects and determine our bond funding that we have available for the next, when we go to the voters in 2026. So that's going to be really important work that happens in the next year.
So if I could just kind of clarify something, it sounds like the capital projects list is not necessarily things that are coming out of the facility audit. Those things are like bigger systems, the like multi-million-dollar things that maybe a principal would not know to put on a spreadsheet. And I bring that up because I had a previous conversation with Dr. Yearwood asking him to kind of codify on the list of capital projects if they were 100% related to the facilities audit, partially related, or not related. And I did not understand that they were kind of in separate buckets. And it sounds like what you're saying is those kinds of projects are not necessarily going to be in the same bucket.
There might be some overlap.
There could
Like,
be
if
some
there's-
crossover.
So
If there's a roof, obviously, if that
Yeah.
needs to be.
There would, yeah,
then-
there would be overlap from time to time. That's why I think it's important that we look at that, your request more intimately. There is overlap when it comes to capital projects and what we're doing. As a matter of fact, I know Randy at one point has had a sort of a presentation or something that he was going to give to us that shows that overlap between capital projects and what we had in our audit. So yes, there is overlap. Is it deliberate? Not all the time, because again, sometimes we have to prioritize a boiler or we have to prioritize an HVAC, to make sure we maintain that safe and learning environment. But there is overlap between the audit and what we have on the capital project. It's not just two separate buckets. There is overlap from time to time.
And I think it's important too, on those facility audits, they have things separated into two buckets, which it's not just a to-do list that we're gonna cross off. Some of those are recurring costs too, of like things that will like have to be done over time, that it's not a one and done type thing. Also, like with.
It's built on life cycles of different systems and equipment.
Right.
so.
Well, so it sounds like you're prepared to kind of to codify the capital projects list
Well,
if it is something that
Heather
comes
and
out
I
of the
have talked
audit.
about that. I
Okay.
think, I mean, if that's the level of kind of specifying that you're kind of that three-tiered, I think we can do that pretty well.
Okay.
And not have to invent or get really creative. But so I anticipate that will be kind of a column that gets added to that group that comes to you. So you'll have some idea. But that being said, the capital expenditure list, there's going to be more things that are involved probably in interior finish or presentation of our buildings than you would normally think of deep into systems and the very expensive. And
Yeah, I would assume when we get more into bond planning, those things are going to be more directly
most of your
related to
bond
the
work
facilities
is going
audit.
to be squarely in those facility audits.
I just think it's helpful to know, like, if that's something, I mean, if no other board member cares about that, then that's,
We talked a little bit
okay.
about kitchens, but some other things, like Carrie Townsend does her library things too, so that's a library, like her media refinishes. That might not be rise to the level of life safety issue, but if we're already doing work in that building, like Hickman got a refresh. Like there's some things for like West, Middle hasn't had theirs done for a long time, but if we're doing other projects in that school, then we might incorporate having like that library redone at that same time. Parkade was the same way when we were doing work in that building as well.
okay. Is this,
One question. I
Yep.
had a bunch, but I'll email them, only because it hasn't been brought up. How are we ensuring a fair, with equity in mind, how are we ensuring a fair distribution of the work orders that do happen, knowing that we have buildings that are 100 years old, knowing that we have buildings that are less than 10 years old, we have title buildings, we have non-title buildings, et cetera?
I think if you're looking at it on the work order level, those kind of come in several different categories. But you have some stuff, hey, the water is leaking on the floor. That's a work. I mean, those are those high. You have to be reactive to a need. So obviously, there's not really any distinction who's getting it. It's whoever is really broke.
The envelope stuff, that
Yeah.
absolutely makes sense. I'm talking about literally everything else.
Well,
Because if the water's leaking at Ridgeway, you have to do that. Or
but a
at Wet, or
lot
wherever.
of our work order system is inundated with a lot of those things. We've got 42 buildings. They range from pretty much brand new to 100 plus years old. There's a lot of stuff that breaks on a daily basis. I mean, so we have some ability to do that internally. A lot of times we're having to go out for a third-party contractor to do those type things. So if we're just talking work order, that's going to be a big chunk of that. We also then, what we try to do too, particularly in areas of systems like HVAC, there's a large chunk of that's wrapped around preventive maintenance, just checking what is on alert, that sort of thing. That's we're staffed pretty thin for that, and so, but that's also a lot of what goes into that work order. So every 6 months, the Daikin units are getting some sort of preventive maintenance look. We have different type units. Some of those some of those don't have to be every 6 months. Sometimes they're an annual. So there's that preventive maintenance schedule that's kind of built into that. So that's across the board. So that everybody gets that. The filter maintenance, we're outsourcing that. We just didn't have the manpower to do that well. But those are the type things that run through that work order system. I think probably maybe the question is a little bit more around this capital list. How is that divided equitably? Sometimes it's based on the need, but then we also look at, we said, okay, what schools got attention last year? Are they in dire need? Maybe their projects don't rise. Where's some place that we haven't? Or do we have a school that the mission has changed and we have been systematically over the past several years putting money towards that? Old Rosetta, because that we've done a lot of improvements in there and still doing some, and that's something that we're including in that. They're not always huge projects, but they're these type projects that fall in this capital need. Now, is that the highest priority building overall? Maybe not, but it's that economy of force. It's a change in mission, and we've got to react. So there's there's the planned part that can be planned, but there is a lot of emerging needs on a daily, weekly basis in this district, just because of the large number of buildings we have and their ages.
Thank you for the questions. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to send them to Dr. Yearwood, and you can copy leadership if you like, and then we'll get those answers to you. Thank you, Randy and Heather, for presenting. Okay, we have time allocated for the staffing allocation follow-up. As far as I know, no one met with anyone from the last work session to now, so I'm assuming there's not a lot of follow-up. So we'll just.
I was going to wait to see what happened here and then be like, hey, Heather, want to get coffee?
And I was gonna say, just in general, like, I'm happy to discuss, like, overall, but I'm hesitant to ever, like, the first thing anyone does if you put a spreadsheet with a bunch of different things comparing different grade levels to different schools to different this, is they want to, like, have a tendency to want to compare this to that. And really, our goal at the district is to look at things globally and not worry about individuals, teachers moving from one classroom to another within a school or from one school to another school, and those type things that could get into personnel and get into the weeds with specific individuals that could be personally identifiable. But I mean, I'm glad to try and answer any kind of overall questions or about the process. And then, of course, if you want to meet with me one-on-one, again,
I can tell by John's face he would probably prefer a one-on-one. You have like.
Whatever you want. My questions are more, thought I was on.
There you go.
Yeah. My questions are more in, I don't understand the why. This seems like an antiquated way to resolve a problem. We will have, X number of teachers in a building, and, understanding that we need, more help potentially in other buildings because positions can't be filled, or more, more sections need to be added. And rather than working towards trying to hire new teachers in those buildings where new sections are needed, we take teachers from existing buildings and move them, which then creates a vacuum in that building. Moving a teacher from Fairview to Rockbridge Elementary, or cutting a section at Fairview, adding a section at Rockbridge Elementary. Now that teacher's left trying to figure out, do I have a job? Do I not have a job? Et cetera. So it's that framework, it's that mindset, and just I don't like this process at all. And so I just want to learn more about the why.
I mean, Michelle's she can pipe in here too, but I just want to say, I mean, ultimately, you can't just continue to add and not move people around, because we have a finite amount of money. And so you can't just continue to add at one school and not take away. If the student population, we have to look at our student population overall, not just, and then within individual buildings. So you can't just keep the same number of teachers if you have a reduced population at a certain building. It just doesn't make sense financially. There's a reason why we can't make, advancements with salaries, because we have more people already to continue to add and have 15 kids in a class when some other school has 26 kids in a class just doesn't make sense. And there's processes that Michelle and her office have in place about, who moves or how they determine who moves, but also in general, contracts are issued to the district, not for a specific school. And so we're not cutting people, and it's never no one's losing their job. You're hired to work for Columbia Public Schools, not necessarily Fairview Elementary or Rockbridge Elementary, but.
So could I encourage you to set up
Yeah,
a one-on-one with Heather and maybe Michelle too? Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Yearwood.
Yeah, John, I wanna chime in here. John, ideally, what you're talking about, your process, that is, I call it the utopian approach. To just hire teachers in as needed, not for anyone. We would love to have a system like that. But because of the variables that we have to deal with, such as budget, years of service, actual need for FTEs, which are moving targets that happen every single year. I've never been in a district where we did not have to move someone, change FTEs and things like that. We have to, make sure that we are watching our budgetary constraints. So again, yeah, I love the idea of visiting with Heather, visiting with Michelle, to gain more insight. But I hear what you're saying. I wish we could just make that happen.
Thanks for being willing to set up something separate.
Do we have, it seems like every year we end up with like some surprise enrollment at a particular school or multiple particular schools. And I guess my question is, do we have any kind of consistent data that in general shows that at the district level, every year we end up with, we've planned for this, but we end up with 1% more or 2% more? And is there a way we can kind of proactively plan for that?
So we know the mobility rates for certain schools. We also know that it's usually higher when you have rental homes or
Right.
homes or dwellings that are leased or rented. And so we do take into account that, but that's also maybe where the property isn't quite as high as other areas. And so we kind of account for that. But there's always people move and they're allowed to move, and that's what we deal with. And so Heather and then Dr. Wilson do a great job, and Dr. Holtz of trying to account for that, but it's not an exact science. But we
No.
definitely take that into account. There's also issues of new housing developments going in, and some of them have lots of children and some of them don't.
How quickly is the district prepared to be able to respond if, say, on the first day of school, we end up with a couple of classrooms in different elementary schools or other schools that are 2 or 3 over the recommended?
So we have a process for that, and
Okay.
I've been working with Mr. Moore to learn more about that, because it
Okay.
is usually more prevalent in elementary, but we do that a lot. And then we would add a classroom aide, or we would make other accommodations to support that school and especially support that classroom teacher. But it's not a nice linear system.
Yeah.
It's very responsive. But that's something that we're working on, with our enrollment and registration, especially in regards to kindergarten enrollment. We're really pushing for those people to come in and tell us that you have a scholar coming to school, so we can account for that.
Right, exactly.
And so it depends on parent schedules, depends on their ability and their knowledge to receive that communication, but that's something we're always working on.
It is not.
And April, I want to add, that we, due to the job shortage conditions that we have, that also is a negative effect on how quickly we can move to supply additional personnel. That's something that we do keep in mind and we do look at very, very closely. So I just want to add that piece.
All right. I think we've kind of wrapped this topic up. All right, next we have the consideration of the visitor management system. This is the second read, so this will be a roll call vote. Is there a motion to approve that Raptor system?
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
It's going to be awesome.
Okay, I know April met with Ms. Baumstark and they had some conversations. We had some good questions at our regular session 10 days ago. So seeing no other discussion, this will be a roll call vote.
No, I just was making sure it was on, because it's upside down. Just in case.
Okay. Mr. Willoughby,
Yes.
Ms. Farrow,
Yes.
Ms. Hayes,
Yes.
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mr. Lyman,
Yes.
Ms. Snodgrass.
Absent.
Oh, of course she is. Excuse me. Ms. Waters.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have the consideration of the weapons detection. This is not an action item. It's just for first read and discussion. I believe we have Mr. Gregory here to talk about that. And I was also on that committee and can try to help answer questions if there are some. I did send a summary to the board. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, we have Mr. Gregory and Mr. Logan who
Yes.
are
All right,
with our Safety
welcome-
and Security Department to
Welcome,
give you a little
Messrs.
information.
Gregory and Logan.
Good morning. Is it on?
Good morning.
So we've been working on this for, gosh, 4 years now. I know Dr. Yearwood, this has been on his radar as ours for a long time, and it's been a big push of his. He and John White worked on this, and when John left, he made it a priority and told me we needed to move ahead with this. What we've seen in the last last several years in the news and here locally is troubling and makes this type of system that much more important in our different layerings of security here in the district. We had a company come in and do an on-site demonstration. We have gone out and visited some other sites and did the RFP, got several vendors to bid on that, narrowed it down. We sent Dr. Galbraith and Dr. Knighton from Hickman, Dr. Galbraith from Battle to look at the open gate system last week. Was it last week? Last week. They came back and really liked the system. It is, if you went to Hickman when Evolve was here, there's similarities, there's differences. Does not have the screen for you to see, but it does alert to metal. You can set the settings for the sensitivity of it. It can go down. You could set it to find a 8-pin, something very small, which we don't want it set that low. Or you can set it to find the common weapons that we've seen in our community, which is what most schools are doing. Very intrusive, very lightweight and portable, which we really liked. We can take it out to a ball field. We could move it to a dance. We could move it pretty much anywhere, which some of the other systems touted, but we use a forklift to get some, to move some. But I could pick this one up, and if I can pick it up, it's lightweight and portable. So we really like this system. Um, Much like the Evolve system, it would you would utilize the pass around. That's what we saw at the other schools. Um, some of the things that we have thought about, uh, some of our outbuildings, for example, our fine arts building at Hickman, and the Casa building. The Casa building is fenced in. Um, Not as big as a concern. The fine arts building, we're working, and in talks with Ron out at facilities and the construction folks on getting that, taking care of that. But even with this system, it's lightweight. It's cost effective compared to the other systems. We can put a system in the fine arts building, if we so chose to do that, or right outside the fine arts building if we chose to do that. So it's very versatile in that sense. We have requested some extra staff to assist with running the system. So we've looked at that. We will look at reallocating some of those early morning folks. What we've heard from all vendors, probably, and common sense, we knew this going in and we see it in all of our buildings, is, and I see our principals and our staff doing it, that personal interaction. Good morning, how are you this morning? They're there at the start of each day, greeting the kids, greeting the other staff that comes in, greeting visitors. So that's a huge part right there. So we have those staff people there already. So I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for us. But the portability and the functionality of the system, and the success that we've seen with the open gate system in other buildings, other districts, I think makes it a good fit for our district.
I have two. So when I was looking over this, it seems very much that there is that one-time initial massive cost, right, to get everything there, but the real annual cost mainly will just come into the space of if something needs to be replaced or maintenance and things of that nature. Then
Correct. With this system, we own it, which is great. And even, they're not pushing software out. The initial calibration, they do it at setup, during the training and everything. So we don't have that ongoing cost that we did with some of the other systems.
okay, and then
And the batteries that this runs on are like,
Yeah.
you can get them at like Home Depot. So you
Yes.
don't have to pay a whole, it's not a proprietary,
Milwaukee
Power
batteries,
system.
they're great.
you highlighted that y'all are going to be submitting in for some potential additional FTE, and so I was just curious if you could expand on that, because like my one thinking around this, right, is coming into like probably FTE of managing, like if there's a request to have these at different spots than what we normally would have in front of the buildings when kids are coming in, and yes, as you shared, there are staff that are welcoming our kids in, and so that kind of is there. But when it comes to my other thought around additional FTE is our external events, right? As you all shared, this seems like, since they're portable, it makes it great for extracurriculars and all of these things, but that also is a kind of an additional staffing. And so I'm just curious, is that where you're looking at those FTEs, or how are you envisioning those like extracurricular usages?
Well, sporting events would be a big thing. Graduation, if we wanted to have it at graduation. Um, I don't really foresee additional FTEs for extracurricular events, because we'll have supervision there, and we'll have security there. If we were to have it here at a board meeting or at graduation, the thing there would be if an item is found. we have to have security there to take control of that item. So that would be the nuance there. But maybe an additional, which we've already requested, 1 or 2 FTEs just for assisting with a new system in the building and adding one more thing to supervision duties. Yeah.
We're looking at middle schools and high schools, yes. Our SROs,
High schools primarily.
okay.
The portability of it affords us, so if on the off chance we suspected something out of middle school, there was a threat on our tip line, we could take it to a middle school. John and I could be at that school for that day or for arrival and set it up and run it.
And then our SROs, I mean, have we talked to them at all about their thoughts or their feelings with
Yes,
with this?
they are 100%.
I would assume they're
on
probably
board.
on board. So.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
As usual, I have several questions. One of them is, and you may not know this off the top of your head. I know, of course, we were out for COVID, so there's some data that we don't have because, we weren't here. But it looks like from DESE records, we had 11 weapons in 22, 20 in 23. Have we had an escalation in that for this school year? And you may not know that answer.
For this school year,
Because I'm assuming that this is 21, 22, 22, 23, 23. I don't know.
Are you talking about the DESE report?
Yes.
The
Oh,
report.
no.
Yeah, we don't have
Right.
a complete set of data for this year.
Right. We don't have a complete set of data that we have submitted to them.
Right.
I was just wondering if Ken had information as far as to this point in time. But like I said,
No, ma'am.
you might not have that off the top of your head. The RFP actually asked for 4 high schools and 7 middle schools for 11 schools, and we asked for bids for a total of 12 to 15 units. But what we're saying is that at this point, we may take those 12 to 15 units and place them at the 4 high schools to start with. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Because I know
Correct.
some of our high schools are rather large and they have multiple points of entry that we might, or multiple events happening on the same night that we might, okay.
Yes.
Okay. How many people can you get through in a period of time? I didn't see that in the document that they submitted, or, because I know the RFP said 1,000 an hour, and I'm like, it'll take 2 hours for Hickman students to get in the building.
I have it.
That's for one unit.
I know.
So each high school that we're going to have will have at least 2 or 3 lanes operational. So we'll be able to get all of our students in within a short time frame so we can get them to class on time.
Right, but you may, well, yes, I guess, because you might have a lane on the east side and a lane on the west side.
So,
Okay.
so the school that we looked at in Alton, it's about 1,900 students, and they have 30 minutes allocated. Their campus is closed. They have 30 minutes allocated to get all of their kids into class on time. They have no issues with it.
Right.
That my notes say at least 500 per 15 minutes for like per lane.
Per lane.
So if there's 3, you've got 1,500 in 15 minutes, which is
Yes. So
pretty outstanding.
yeah, the one school that we looked at, and then Open Gate, the folks that are vending or selling this system, they have assured us, and what we received in Alton was very good feedback, and there's no issues with getting that number of students into class on time.
Well, and we have, of course, at all of our high schools, a certain number of students who's starting out their day at the Career Center, a certain number that are starting their day at the MAC, a certain number that are coming, I don't know how it'll work, but, that are coming at 6 o'clock in the morning for basketball practice or band practice or something like that. So it's not like all 2,100 are showing up at 8:30 p.m. or 8:30 a.m. to get in the door at the same time.
Yeah, I'm assuming because of the portability of these, there shouldn't not coming on the heels of the facility discussion, there shouldn't be a need to build anything at the schools to make these things work. Short
No.
of making sure that all the doors that are supposed to be locked,
Are
et cetera.
locked. Correct.
Except for we might do something as far as connecting fine arts with the main building at Hickman, so you have a more secure flow to then go through
I
the.
was thinking more like, we're not gonna have to put any concrete pillars up anywhere or board up any doors. It's,
No,
we're gonna be able to
not
move
at
these
all.
things around where they're needed and structure.
25 pounds apiece. You
Yeah.
literally just grab them in each hand and you walk them. You set them in place. They go through their calibration and then they're ready to go. Takes less than 2 minutes from moving them from one place to the other.
And like no outlets, you don't have to like set them up near an outlet with extension cords and mats and all that stuff.
Great.
And this one was fully waterproof, right? So this
Yes.
is not the one that needed the tents over
No.
it if it was outdoors, correct?
Completely waterproof.
Okay.
It doesn't need canopies?
No.
Oh, good.
How often do the batteries, I assume every night at the end of school, someone's going to have to take the battery out and plug it in. You can't just leave it in there all the time. I leave my,
18-hour batteries.
I think I said
14 hours.
14 hours.
how often do those need to be replaced?
So I asked the lady that has been selling the system for 5 years. To her knowledge, she has not known any battery need to be replaced at this point. So the systems that are the longest in place that they have sold, those original batteries are still operational.
They're all
The
lit-
Milwaukee brand is high quality.
They're all lithium ion?
Yes.
We don't want that nickel cadmium stuff. That stuff, you burn through those. Okay. I'm a craftsman guy, so I can deal with Milwaukee's fine.
All right, Mr. Willoughby.
When I was reading through the document, I know that they had a piece, or maybe I was on their website, that they do, that you can get kind of like logoing over it. Is that something that we're looking into that I might have missed in the contract? Logoing over the
sleeves.
The
pillars
sleeves for the,
Yes. It's been discussed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually separate. It's a separate company that does that, but but yes, we have had discussion about what the cost would be associated with it. It's a couple $100 per unit to do.
And I mainly asked, maybe for normal usage of the school day, right? It's not that great, but like, for our extracurriculars where we know we're going to have littles coming in and walking through, it makes it a little bit more friendly.
I think most schools that utilize this system, they have the sleeve. Like they've, personalized it to their own
mascot.
building. Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much. We
you
will have our second read and approval at the April 8th meeting. And there's like a 6 to 12 week lead time, I think, on these, so they'll be ready to go.
Madam President, could I interject and make a privilege motion to move to postpone item 8 until our next work session for discussion?
I think that is in order. I'm seeing the time. Is there any objection to moving the discussion of committees or a third meeting to a following session?
Yes.
There is an objection?
Mm-hmm.
You want to have that discussion today?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm only one person.
Well, is there?
Yeah, are you? Did you? Second
Well,
it?
I'm going to second Blake's motion. So I guess let's just all in favor of moving the. Well, do you want to have any discussion? Is it just based on time?
I know that you had showed me what we were having. That's where if it did get seconded, I was saying we could talk. I mean, I know that there's a lot there. I just didn't. I maybe it's not good or anything like that. I just know that we spent an hour in our executive session talking around some great important things, and that just kind of ate some of that time. And I don't want us to be shortened by this item. But I also understand, right? Ms. Hayes will not be here next month, and so. And so we might miss a piece of the conversation that's important.
So are you wanting to have this at work session, the next work session? Paul, is that before or after our policy meeting?
My only concern is BCE. We're at a logjam in the policy committee as to how to edit that at this point. And so by not doing it now, we will not have a BCE change in time for our reorg meeting. And if everybody is understanding of that, I'm probably going to vote against this, but I understand just because of BCE, not because of the other things. But my concern is BCE more than anything else.
Oh, brother. All right. Well, I can kind of see that. So, there is a motion and a second. at this point. So all in favor of moving that discussion to the next work session, raise your hand. All in favor of keeping it today, raise your hand. All right, we'll keep it today. However, for this item, the cabinet is not required to be here. This is mainly a board-only discussion. It is still an open session, so, you know, we cannot kick you out, but you are not required, and you are welcome to return to your very long list of other things you have going on. So do you want to start with BCE, Paul?
Yeah, and like I said, that's the only one of these that I feel like,
Oh.
It said roll call, but that should have just said discussion.
Yeah, we just had that. That was just a first read, so there wasn't a vote on that. Yeah, so we're on number 8.
like I said, my only concern with this discussion, we can move the rest of it. I'm all in favor of that. But the BCE, we've been in a logjam in policy for a while. BCE right now has us having basically our committees hard-coded into the policy. We have the policy committee, we've got the finance, and we've got the long-range planning, and the number of people on that. And MSBA, their model policy allows the board to set up its structure annually. So basically, the board would vote annually in its reorg meeting to set up its own structure. That gives this board more flexibility as to the number of committees at once and any changes at once. So there are differing opinions here in our committee. So I'd like to know what the board thinks of going to more of a set it up annually process versus what we have now. And just so you know, I don't think there's any intention of getting rid of the committees that we have right now, but in the future, we may want to add one more. We may want to, as we did sort of this year, combine 2 of them into one, but that allows the board to actually do what it needs to do in its restructuring meeting to set up all of its committees. And I'll just leave it at that. I know. And go ahead.
I just want to say, Noelle she had printed copies of our policy and the MSBA standard policy, and she's getting those copies now, just so we know what language we're talking about.
I think it makes sense to keep the option of letting the new boards decide what kind of configuration they want. Our board changes at different points, and then having something set for a new board doesn't seem fair to them. So they might have room or space to deal with 4 different committees. Another board might have room or space to deal with 2 committees. So I think leaving that open for that board to decide each school year feels like the best option.
I agree. My only change to that would be I would keep finance on. Just, we're always going to have a finance committee. I would leave that on. And then would there be verbiage in there to be able to add, committees at any point in time? We get 6 months into the year and all of a sudden we need a committee on X, Y, or Z. Would the new policy give us that ability to start that, or would it be an ad hoc thing? Or
well, I think we'll get the model policy, but I think that's always an option. And of course, if what you're telling me it's the will of the board to have that a sentence in there to ensure that the board can do that, certainly I'll bring that to policy committee and we'll make sure we get something drafted to include that.
Yeah, the thinking there being, if we want to keep it open and have the ability to change every year, let's make sure that you have one meeting to make those changes and then you're out of luck until next go around. So
my comment would be, and I don't have our policy in front of us, but I have the core policy, and I guess what I would ask, because obviously I am still confused on the committees, what I would ask is to make sure that board leadership or the board members that are serving on the committees do have a clear understanding of what the purpose is of that committee, and what the expectation is of that committee, what kind of deliverable the board might be looking for from that committee, so that we can have really meaningful discussion and work at each of the committee meetings and understand what the goal is of those committees, whether we indicate the committee name in the policy or not. Having those guidelines would be helpful. As far as naming the committees, I do like it being very broad. That's usually how policies are constructed, so that you're not pigeonholed. You know, we might decide to change to something else. We might decide to combine some committees, and specifically outlining that does not, we can always change the policy, but frankly, we've had some policies we've been discussing for 5 months, so it's not necessarily a quick process.
I want to jump in, if you don't mind me jumping in here on this discussion. I'm just curious, John, when you say keep finance and make that like a priority and look at long range and policy is not a priority, just kind of keep it in there. Can you kind of tell me a sort of your justification for why only finance?
Well, I don't think that. I think we absolutely still need a long range planning and facilities committees. I think that my understanding of what the change was that we were going to effectively, in the way that it's currently listed, that there really aren't named committees that we absolutely are going to be stuck with. Although we
Policy.
policy would say that there aren't, the policy committee would exist, but there wouldn't be other committees that we would have that we would be, stuck to. Obviously, there are going to be some that we're going to have every single year, but we don't want to have it written in, codified, that you have to have this. Although we know that we're going to. I think the goal or the reasoning behind this change is just to give us more of an ability to open up other committees. And so rather than saying, I think there's an all or none sort of thing where we're not going to have any listed, like right now it's, finance committee, long range planning, policy, but in there it wouldn't be any of those.
Well,
it's
yeah, it's the red paragraph.
yeah.
This draft is actually one of the drafts that the committee was looking at as we were getting logjam trying to come up with it. This isn't our current policy.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah. But the verbiage is
Correct.
may include.
Right. This is the working kind of proposed.
Yeah, for the record, I think all of those committees are absolutely still needed and necessary. It was more just if I didn't necessarily like not having finance as a codified in policy committee that guarantee we will have every single year. There's no reason to not have facilities, there's no reason to not have long range planning, but I want to make sure that finance is one that we always have.
I would say I feel the same about policy.
And policy.
As opposed to finance. Like, I think policy is really the only one that we are required to have as the board. But Mr. Willoughby, what did you have?
No, yeah, I think having these three base ones codified in policy is good and robust. I think what we could very much do, from my personal opinion, right, is have that ability to add things, have abilities to change, to discuss, is there a need for a different structure of how many people are on the committee when it comes to board members, right? Things of that nature. The only reason why I say that is because I know in past conversations that I've had with past board members, I don't know how much I've talked about this with y'all as we've gone through it, and especially with not being on policy this year as this has been going through too, is that I would really like to see like these, with not thinking about changing anything, if it all was codified right, having our community members that serve on these committees be on a 2-year rotation and no term limits, right? You could still reapply and get appointed back, still that, but like instead of it being an annual, it's this every year we're appointing one person or reappointing one person, and it allows for a little bit more continuity of process, as well as I do think that these committees themselves are the larger structural pieces of our governance as as the governing board, because we do have that fiduciary duty, and we do have that space of a piece of that fiduciary duty is really looking at our deferred maintenance. Long range really, I think part of why long range has kind of steamed down and over the last couple of years has felt unneeded is because we've been reaching the end of the previous 10-year plan of growth, right? I think we're in a space now where it's going to seem to be more needed again, especially if we're moving into a more robust way of engagement with that committee and thinking about our deferred maintenance and our bond projects and responding to that, right? So I think that I understand why people feel like a long range is not needed. I just think that part of that is due to the fact that the previous major projects that were onus for it, they're ending. And so now it's about a repurposing of focus for that committee compared to policy and finance, right? We always have a budget every year. We always have things we gotta do. We always have to review our policies. So like that goal and mission, right, and deliverables is concrete. I think it just feels less concrete for this committee because of that kind of change. And so I do think I would personally like to still see those codified while I think it's okay to give some more flexibility about how maybe those committees might be structured, right? If we were to add into at the beginning of the year, say 2 ad hoc committees for that year, right? Maybe it is more prudent that, all right, we're already in the middle and we've already figured out how we are going to be doing like our long range sort of planning of things and conversations. Maybe that committee only needs a chair for this year, right? To run it and have those conversations. I think that's a great conversation for the board to have on how allocation goes of board members on committees. But I do personally think having them codified, these 3, is still good. And having them codified, I think, allows us to have community members engage in those committees in a more robust way that allows, if we were to add in that kind of space of like a 2-year term instead of it just being annual. And so that there is kind of a deeper investment.
I have a question for Blake. So let's say in the future, whatever board decided that, because I think it might have been this way at some point in the past, decided that they're going to make it they want to make it a combined finance and long range planning committee. So one committee that covers both those topics. Do you see that then this policy would need to be changed if we're, stipulating finance, long range, and policy as the 3? Yep.
Okay, I don't want to.
I know.
I think it would have to depend on the wording.
Okay.
Right. I could see that going. I personally, as someone who have chaired both of these and just where we're at right now, I think combining is going to be a lot of work for those that are on the committees and doing that stuff. But I do get there might be a future space where that could go, and maybe that's in the policy language itself of like saying that we will always have, these are our like concrete 3 committees. They might look, the composite of how they operate and look might be different, but we will always have these committees.
Right. What I'm sort of hearing is that we want to make sure that the policy continues to have these 3 listed, but we want to be able to make the language of the policy so that if we ever decide to combine, change the structure and all of that, to have it to where maybe we do vote it in on an annual basis, but we ensure that we have these 3 structures in place, whatever they look like, and the board can determine that on an annual basis. So essentially a hybrid of the 2 is what I'm sort of hearing.
I also, I would agree.
I appreciate a little bit more flexibility in the language, because even like something that was said was over the past several years, we've seen like a little bit of a decrease in the need to have facilities because we were in a different space. Well, if that's true, then we weren't really following the letter of our policy during that period of time. But had it been more flexible, you know, it's like we're automatically responding to the need with more meetings and a more robust structure. So I don't see that it needs to be spelled out in policy, because it's on us to respond to what our needs are as a district and as a board, regardless of how it's spelled out. And that's kind of how we did it anyway. We were responding to just the circumstances of the district previously, and we will continue to do that. I do see a need for just being mindful of people's bandwidth and availability to go to multiple meetings. And, you know, if we're going to have like a couple of ad hoc committees and then we have 3 already in policy that we have to man, you know, we could get stretched a little bit thin. So I'm, you know, I would put my chip in the bucket for more flexibility.
I just wanted to point out our current policy does allow for what's called advisory committees with the approval or direction of the board. So I don't know if that's the same thing as an ad hoc committee. I see them as the same thing, but I just wanted to point that out. It's on the back page.
Right, and
I
in
think
fact,
so.
as the policy committee was discussing that, we all decided that we liked the advisory committee structure here, even though we haven't used it in a while, to allow the board very expressly to be able to do that. So that I don't think that was something the policy committee was even considering taking out.
Do you feel like, Paul, you've
I
gotten
agree.
kind of what you need?
I agree with. Yeah, I agree with Paul. What you're saying, Paul, in that at any point in time, this board can come together and set up a committee to do just about whatever. It's the will. We do the will of the board, and so if there needs to be an additional committee on, let's say, anything, the board just needs to guide, especially us in administration, and we will, you know, make it happen. So yes, that I totally agree with you on that. One thing I do want to add is, I don't know if Heather wants to chime in, or Michelle, on the long range committee part or the policy part. I know you have some very deep institutional knowledge. Is there anything you all wanted to add to this conversation as we are discussing this here with the board?
Sorry. I think we've talked about it before, but you know, just the history of how the committees came to be, and the policy that exists is a district developed policy with the support of you know, MSBA when it was originally written, because it is an exclusive policy to Columbia Public Schools, to establish committees to help inform and recommend items to the board for its consideration. It is the 3 standing committees, and then the ability to establish ad hoc committees. Throughout the course of history, the ad hoc committees have really been like, if there at one point there was a different way that we handled attendance areas, so there had been an attendance area committee. Transportation, when we had been looking at changing our tiered system and our school start times, so that was an ad hoc at that point in time. And so that's, you know, under the purview of the board to determine when they would need those and when they would not. Our facilities policy actually talks about naming committees. So at some point we have a new elementary school that's coming on board, and so the board will need to take some sort of action to establish that committee and what that process looks like. That one is more covered under the facilities policy, if I'm remembering correctly. So the intention way back when was to create additional transparency and opportunity for the public to hear robust discussions about the different topics that come forth, either through finance or long range or policy, or at one point in time there was achievement, which has now sort of been taken on more by the board itself as a whole versus a separate committee. And it just provided another avenue for community input and opportunity to listen, to hear some of the questions, and it made the board meetings themselves during that period of time especially more efficient. because the longer discussions, just like what we're have had today during a work session, were able to happen through a committee structure. And so then there was less of that at the actual board meeting because there was more of an understanding of what was being considered that evening. So that's all.
To say, I know that you guys have said several times, like, this is not the MSBA standard policy, and we realized that when these were constructed, that we did that intentionally, that it wasn't the MSBA policy, because like Michelle said, when it went into effect, it was really important for us to, we were really on this thing with transparency to be able to, when we were creating the long-range financial and long-range capital plans for the next foreseeable future, that we were being as transparent as we could with the public. And so that's why it was intentional that we named those two additional committees that were not in the original MSBA policy for the long range and the finance committee in that policy.
I just have one quick thing. I think the consideration between finance and long range, I think that is a legitimate thing to think about. There's nothing in long range that is not directly connected to finance, and there's a large part of finance is directly connected to facilities. So I don't think that's a consideration that's too far out there. And I say this because depending on what the cycles are, the financial cycle is pretty regimented. Long range, it's dependent on construction, it's dependent on when bonds are available, it depends on when bids are let. And sometimes it seems, over the 6 years I've done this, is there times that we're trying to put together a meeting because we're supposed to have a meeting, but it might not make sense. I think by combining the two, then you eliminate some of that. But you definitely then have, but then also sometimes with long range, now we're a month away or we're 2 months out because we've spread it out. It's like we could really use some advice on that. So I think that might be a true consideration. I don't think you would ever want to eliminate those two big topics because they're critical. And even though we may not be in the building of new buildings in the next 10, 15 years like we have previously, there's still going to be large projects going on. Actually, the work may be a little more difficult because it's easier to get people on board with a new building because it's all, but when you're talking digging a little deeper into this deferred maintenance, that's going to be have to be crafted a little differently and understood. So I think there might be a good reason to do that, and just because, and then we're also, you're talking about bandwidth of people. You know, it's the thinking that's on those committees is not that diverse as a group from finance to long range. Many of them could go on either side of that, and times there was previously overlap. So I really think that might be a consideration. Not that either one, and I'm not saying neither one are important. I think they're both very important. But for efficiency and just the way those two areas cycle, it may be more efficient to do it that way. And then every meeting may be much more meaningful than simply maybe a report out of things. There may be more actionable items. There may be deeper discussions that are available at each time.
I appreciate that. I just want to give my 2 cents real quick. I mean, as a person that would have to lead that committee, then that is a lot for one person, I think. But I mean, that is up to the will of the board, and I will do whatever it is that you want. But I do think there is various needs, and that would be a lot of information to have to do for, if we combine both of those into one. But again, I will do whatever you guys think is best going forward.
Well, there's nothing to say you couldn't have co-leads. I mean, that's actually appointed by the superintendent, not the board. So, but we'll continue to discuss this amongst ourselves and with policy. And thank you for everyone's participation. I think we are going to hit pause on the third meeting discussion and the listening session discussion until April. Do we need to vote on that separately?
As long as
I'm
no one
fine with
objects.
Without, unless there's any
I
objection.
move to adjourn.
Okay. Thank you. All in favor of adjourning, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Looks like we're adjourned.